Hello. So you have been working on your project and you've created a number of different meshes. And now you are starting to work on your UI and you need to create some icons for some buttons to that represent the meshes and objects that are within your game. And you've discovered that, well, you need some other tools. And you've looked all sorts of places, and you find that why isn't it just as simple as being able to take the little icon that Unreal has already created for you in the mesh? I don't know why, but there's this edit mode for the thumbnail, which you can select, and you can actually select your icon, and you can zoom in and out and change its rotation. I don't know why there isn't then an option to just grab that. Well, by the end of this video or video series, if it's too long, you'll be able to basically do that. Not from here, you'll create it yourself, but it basically will generate from your selected mesh a icon that's hopefully suitable enough for your game purposes. And it'll all be done within the Unreal editor. We won't leave the editor at all during the entire process. So I hope that sounds like something that you're interested in. And I look forward to showing you how to do that. Stay tuned. Welcome to this video tutorial on how to create a system so that you can create icons from your object meshes for use in your UI. All done without leaving the Unreal editor. To get started, we need a few basic things to get set up. So I started here with a blank third-person template just to have some basic components available. I'm going to go back into the content browser here and let's make a new map. New level, I call it Icon World. We're going to save that and we'll go into that. Some of the things that we're going to want in here. First of all, we're going to need a camera. With the camera, we're going to also want to be able to capture a 2D image from what the camera sees. So we want a capture component. A scene capture 2D. Okay. And that we want it to be parented to the camera so that it has the same view. And I'm going to just give that a name. I'm going to rename that to be our camera or our scene capture object mask, because that's more or less what it's really actually doing. Another item that we're going to need in here is a light. So let's add a directional light. Boy, I spell poorly. A directional light, which we will place once we get going. We'll move it around, get the shading and whatever how we want it. And that's basically the start of what we need in this particular on the level. There's going to be one other item here that we're going to add, which is going to be our working editor blueprint that will hold the functionality to do what we have to do. but we haven't created that yet, so we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. Some of the settings that we could make maybe right now, or maybe we don't make them now. Let's do those later. Actually, so let's set up our camera actor. Perspective mode is fine. We want a little bit tighter field of view so that we'll be more zoomed into our object when we're creating the icon. So I'm going to say a nice wide angle, wide angle so that we can be close to the object, 28-degree field of view. The aspect ratio of its view, I'm going to set it to be 1:1 to make a square icon. I'm going to constrain the action. And what else? What other little settings were there that needed to be set here? That's about it for the camera. For the scene capture, we want to kind of match those same settings so that it does actually give us the same object, right? So again, perspective and a 28-degree field of view. We see that it wants a texture target. So that's what it's going to capture its image onto, but it wants one to start from. So we'll create that in a moment, or maybe do that right now. Oh no, here let's look at another couple of settings here first. So the capture source, there's a number of different options in here. And what we want to do is leave it, I guess, at its default, which is for the scene color in RGB and put a 0 in the alpha channel. Oh no, and put the inverse opacity in the alpha channel. We'll be using that later when we create our material that the render target will be using to generate the icon. We don't need to capture every frame. We don't need to capture on movement because we're going to have a button in our editor that we're going to click when we want to capture the image. We're going to use this option here on the show only list. So the primitive render mode, we are going to use the show only list. So from that, from the scene, it's only going to be rendering or capturing items that show up in this array. So right now we don't have anything to add here. But once we create our blueprint, it will show up in here, and the objects that are contained within that blueprint will be our actor that we will be capturing. That way we don't need to have to worry about it, like creating a depth mask to try to isolate the object in the scene. We're just going to capture that specific object. Okay, and that takes us to the setup of those two things. Let's create the render texture target that the scene capture object requires. Go to the content browser, I'm going to right click, come down to textures, render target. We'll call this one render texture target icon. Okay, we'll come in here. Here's where we can set up some of the basically create the parameters that the capture object is going to be using. And thankfully, a lot of it's default, but we are going to be capturing for the purpose of our UI, so we want to set that. The size of the image, I would recommend that we try to capture with a high enough level of detail so that if we end up having to enlarge the icon later, that the detail would still be there, but we can when we go to use the object or the icon in our game, we can use a much smaller size of it, and its quality is just going to get better. And so let's leave it at 256 by 256. And we want to make sure that we have this, the RGBA. We want to make sure we have all 4 channels on that. So that's basically the default. And so we'll save that. And that's all we had to do there. Okay, now that we have our render texture target, let's set up a material that will use it. So let's get a new material. I'm going to name it Post Process Icon. Let's go in there. Settings for this, material domain, we'll set to user interface. The blend mode, we're going to set it to translucent. And here's our basic output for our material. We are going to use a texture sample parameter 2D. I'm going to call this one final color texture. Okay. We're going to take the RGB values. That's going to be into our final color. We are going to take the alpha channel and we're going to do a 1- node. And we're going to throw that into our opacity. Okay. And now what we need to set here is what texture. So this final color texture, we will pick our render texture target icon that we used, that we created. It's blank right now because there's nothing in it, but once the scene capture component in our scene, it will grab an image, it's going to throw it into this texture target, and then this material will update. And that's how that is going to be set. So we can save that. I don't think there was any other settings here. I should do one check here. No, I think we're all good here. Check my notes here. Yeah, so now we can close this. And what we're going to do is right click on this and we're going to create a material instance on this. So I'm going to call this, what am I going to call this? I'm going to call this, well, I'm going to just call it my material instance post-process icon. Oh, I put the instance at the end. I don't like that. Okay. That gets us almost there. Well, with the basic components. Now that we've got our material and our render target set, let's create the utility blueprint that's going to do all of the work for us. So right click, editor utilities, editor utility blueprint. Let's select the editor utility actor. I'm going to call this my editor blueprint make icon. Open that up. One item that we're going to be using a lot and switching as our control is we're going to need to set a static mesh. So let's add one into our scene for this object. And let's make it our root. And I'm going to change its name just to avoid some confusion and call it the static mesh component. Okay. And so let's start with that. And I'm going to start a little bit different than I've had this before. We're going to create a new variable, and I'm going to create a new variable called our selected mesh. And this is going to be a static mesh object. Static mesh object reference. And we are going to expose it. And I think that's all we need to set there. We'll compile that. Save. It doesn't need to have no default value. That's fine. And then let's go into the event graph. Well, let me just check one thing here. Just want to make sure. Yeah, let's go with that for now. I think if I go back to the, maybe just drag this off of here, come into here, and go into my world, and let's add this to our world. So let's just drag it in from our content browser. Drag it into the world. Okay, and we'll just set it at 0, 0, 0. Now that it's here, you can see that we've got that selected mesh variable exposed for us in the editor here, right? So we'll see how things move around after. Okay, so that at least gets me started. That I know that this is working. So let's continue back here. Let's go into our events and get rid of all these. Something I learned as I did this was when you create a custom event, and we'll call this one, I'm going to name it starting with the letter A because this is going to be the first one in the list. I'm going to call it load mesh. And what we need to do is set call in editor. And then that way, if I compile and save this and we go back to our world, I should see a button here.